question, because the analytic-synthetic distinction is one you can make within language itself, whereas the scheme-content thing is basically an epistemological idea that rests upon the idea of foundationalism of some sort or other. It's certainly in Kant, but it didn't die with Kant by any means. In fact, Kant introduced, in a way, conceptual relativism. I mean, he happened to think we're stuck with one system, but he introduced the possibility of many systems, and that was where the scheme-content distinction really took off, so to speak. So I'm not sure I see it exactly the way you do. I mean, I'm against both the analytic synthetic and the scheme content distinctions, and I think you think I go against that in at least two different ways, and I've thought about that from time to time and wondered if I try to say what I think about the notion of truth, for example, is that really a bad style analytic philosophy? Well, in some way it may be, but in another way it certainly isn't. I don't think it can be defined, and I don't think it makes sense even to try to give a definition. So in one sense of what analytic philosophy always tried to do, I think it's hopeless in almost any case we'd be interested in doing it. I haven't said much about this, but I certainly know that we use the word true in a lot of different contexts. And I'm just interested in one particular one. And there, my way of dealing with it is to trace out connections that most of us take for granted, but don't necessarily see all the implications of them. So I'm not sure. I mean, it seems to me, at least, that the method I use has a much broader brush to it. I say, well, here are a whole lot of things that we think about truth. Put them together, and you can see that a theory of this kind captures in a very rough way something that actually is much more complicated than that, and so forth. But what it catches in a rough way is just the notion of the fact that different beliefs and different sentences are, for all of us, related to each other in various ways. And those relations, the most clear of those relations, have to do with one sentence implying another. And we don't necessarily agree on which ones imply which ones, but nevertheless, we think it's a good kind of reasoning if we go from one to another in such a way as to preserve truth. Even though we don't know that the premises are true, we're convinced that if the premises are true, the conclusion is true. Now, that kind of interaction between thoughts, sentences, or how arguments go when we're doing our best to give good arguments, is exactly what's captured by Tarski. That's why I'm interested in him. And since you see a lot of good in Brandam's emphasis upon how we argue, right? Let's say we're interested in the same thing. Yeah. I mean, good arguments are truth-preserving, and that if you want to prove that an argument is valid, that is, you have to have a theory of truth. For me, that's the big work of a theory of truth. It just shows what lies behind common sense. Yeah. Let's see. The other thing that I thought you might be loading on me a little more than is right, as you say, I have a project. I mean, at one time I thought it was a big insight for people who were trying to analyze things like indirect discourse and belief sentences and so on, and a lot of other things too, to see that there was a sense in which you didn't understand their suggestions unless you could back it up with a clear semantics. And so I became interested in producing such a semantic analysis for things that we're all interested in, like causal statements and so forth. I never was as beset as many people thought I was with the idea of, oh, let's work out every last detail. John Wallace and I once, we were egging each other on, I must say it, this a long time ago, when he was a student of mine. And we said, of course, you've got to be able to do this for every sentence. So we sat down with War and Peace or something like that, and he said, we'll take the first sentence, and then we'll go on to the next sentence, and so forth, and we'll say what the logical form of everything in it is. We never got beyond the first sentence. So ever since then, when people said, Davidson's got this great project, I've always laughed. I thought, well, that project didn't get off the ground.
But, I may be wrong about this, but I think that ever since the original positivist, program of analyzing everything down to phenomenal primitives and so forth,
right,
went drained into the sands, Anglophone philosophers have been hoping somebody would come up with something analogous. And one effect you had at Oxford was to say, "Oh, thank God, we have a project again."
Yes, that's true.
And then somehow they thought, well, do we? I mean, and that's I guess one thing I find funny about our discipline, or the Anglophone part of our discipline, is that somehow analytic philosophy only makes sense if you have a project like Kant's or like Carnap's or like the so-called Davidson program, and yet somehow nobody has it, but we're still, we still live in hope or something.
Well, I know that this doesn't interest you much, but I think, in fact, this insight that I had, that here were some standards, maybe not for getting it right, but surely for getting it wrong, has done a lot of good. I mean, I think a lot of good philosophy has resulted from that.
I think a lot of highly intelligent philosophy has resulted. I mean, some of the things you've done and some of your students have done have taken my breath away. I mean, your analysis of, Galileo said that the Earth moves. I was stunned by when I first read it, and I think it's one of the neatest things that I ever came across in philosophy. And there are a lot of things you've done like that, a lot of things other people have done, and yet what I want to do is sort of relate these things to, some great big something or other.
Yeah.
And that's what I can't do, and that's what sometimes makes me feel.
Why do you think it should be related to some great big something or other?
I'm a romantic. When I read literary critics who give an immensely clever reading of a text, I'm impressed. But the only critics I really love are the ones who, the Harold Blooms, the people like that, who have a story to tell about, how we got from here to there and what lies ahead and all that. Taste for Hegel, Dewey, and, romantic philosophy of that sort.
Well, when it comes to the literary critics, I love them both.
Mm-hmm.
Really.
Yeah.
I mean, if they're good.
I don't know if this is the most appropriate moment, but I'd like to bring in a question that Donald's certainly written a piece on metaphor and how you view the concept of metaphor in your... You've obviously agreed a lot between you as to what you consider in common, but is there any differences, do you think, in your concept of metaphor?
I thought of myself as just taking this is something I keep doing. I mean, I took Donald's piece on metaphor and just, wrote it up, and I took his piece on, divided consciousness and Freud, and wrote it up. I never thought of myself as differing, though I admit every time I do this, people say I get Davidson wrong.
I would have said, in those two cases, certainly, that you had me exactly right.
Good.
In fact, I mean, people do often say that you got me wrong, and sometimes there are little things where I think you're quite conscious that we wouldn't agree. But my own view is that on the things that matter the most to me, you're one of the few people who has not only got it right, but furthermore likes it, which is, let's say, well, I mean, that isn't, the important thing isn't that you like it. The important thing is that you make something of it.